Hello, everyone. Welcome back to A New Crusade. Today, I'm going to be talking with Bug Hall. We are going to be talking about a mixture of things. I mainly hope to ask him about his life, about his faith, and especially about his continuing journey with homesteading and with his, I believe he calls it a lay vow of poverty. So without further ado, Bug, would you like to introduce yourself to everyone?
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm Bug Hall.
So one of the things that was kind of funny is you and I followed each other on Twitter, and I think I had seen you either reposted or you had been reposted by Tim Gordon. And I saw on your thing, on your profile, it said something like Academy Award winning actor or something like that. And I said, oh, that's like, he's funny. That's a funny joke. And I didn't realize who you were. I was like, this guy's funny. And then I was reading through all your stuff and I was like, oh, this guy's really cool. Like he's like joking around and he's funny. And I looked you up at some point and I was like, oh no, he's being serious. Like he actually was involved in the film industry for a long time.
I'll tell you, all the humor that people find in what I say. I never say anything just for the sake of being funny, and somehow my real life and my real thoughts tend to be funny.
Yeah, that's fair. So, you've talked a lot publicly about your kind of conversion story, and I'm kind of curious, what specifically was it that drew you to Catholicism and not to, other options? I don't know if I've heard you talk about that with someone.
Yeah, well, I know there's a big, there's like the big online debate between the Ortho Bros and the Protestants and all that. That wasn't really in my purview. When I converted, I met a Catholic priest, and in one night, I basically became Catholic. Now, there was some stuff behind the scenes, I think, working towards that. My business partner had converted about a year before that. And this same priest, who ended up being all of our spiritual director for a long time, he had told him, pick the person in your life that you think is least likely to convert, and I want you to pray for him every day for a year. And so I was that guy. So certainly those prayers went a long way. And then, when I met this priest, I got into one argument with him, real kind of infantile 14-year-old edgelord stuff. I mean, I had no real philosophical foundation, and it was, he was given a talk, a private talk in someone's house on Thomistic theology, particularly on the seven deadly sins and how it affects your nature. And this priest also, he works a lot with like psychology, so it's kind of like Thomistic psychology, I guess, in a way, like how your psychology begins to break down as you use your reason contra nature, right? So that was really the root of the talk. And I don't know, man, the talk was so plainly true. It was like the truest thing I had ever heard. And after I got into an argument with him, I sat down and actually listened for the rest of the talk. I listened really fervently, and by the end of the night, I said, "This is just so true. Where does it come from? Where I came from in life? Everyone's ideas are their own ideas,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so you just presume, wow, this guy's smart. He's got great ideas, And so I was expecting him to say, well, after years of study, I came up with these ideas. And of course, he didn't say that. He said, this is all just the perennial teaching of the Catholic Church. And I said, okay, well, I want to know more about that. So I asked, how do I become Catholic? And I spent 2 months taking a crash course, really, with some monks down in Orange County, California. It was 2 months to Easter. Maybe it was closer to 3 months to Easter. And they basically said, look, if you come every day, we'll teach you the Catholic faith. And if we believe that you're catechized well enough, we'll baptize you.
That's awesome.
And that was it. Yeah, that was it. I didn't. It's funny because so I went down to Texas about 6 months after my conversion. First, I went out to the desert, in Mojave Desert, and I lived in a tent out there for a long time. And I would just kind of come into town for mass. But I wanted to go home. I wanted to go just kind of be with my family. And I thought, because I didn't know anything about apologetics, it just didn't, in my mind, there's one church, there's one Christianity. I didn't come into a crowd that was like real steeped in the whole apologetics stuff. And so it just didn't occur to me. My brother he's an independent fundamentalist, first degree separationist Baptist youth minister. And it didn't occur to me that that there would be any divide. Like I just thought, oh, he's going to be real excited that I'm a Christian now. He's going to be really excited.
Yeah.
And I got down there, and man, it was like out of the frying pan into the fire. The very first day. Now I came right into the traditional faith, but nobody explained to me a lot of the particulars. For instance, not going to Protestant places. So, because that just didn't pertain to my state in life really at the time when I was converting.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I got down there, he was like, "Hey, do you want to come to my church?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "It's it's not a real church. It's just a building, and you've got a guy that's just going to preach from the Bible, right?" He was like, "Yeah, we just preach from the Bible." I said, "Well, I don't see anything wrong with that. Yeah, I'll go." And I went, and he must have told his pastor, "Hey, my brother's coming. He just converted to the Catholic faith, the whore of Babylon. We got to get him. We got to get him saved. He's a Catholic now." So I showed up, and the preacher there, the heretic preacher, they gave this long sermon on basically, contra Catholicism. It was just the whole thing was about how Catholics are going to hell, and the Catholic Church is the whore of Babylon, all that stuff. And I was enraged. I was so mad. And so when he was done, they did the altar call because that's what they do. And I sat there and just listened through his thing, and I could see my brother kind of looking at me out of the side of his eye. And I stood up, and I stared him when he did the altar call. I stood up. I think I like to subvert people's expectations. I think it's funny. So I stood up, and I could see everyone kind of got mildly excited. And I did the sign of the cross, and I turned around and said the creed as I walked out. And that was it. And so me and my brother worked on this ranch together, and I learned apologetics pretty in depth over that year that we were working on the ranch together, because I would go home every day. I'd buy books. All my buddies in California would send me all their books and stuff, and I read it. All the contemporary apologetics, all those guys, the Petries and the whoever else, Scott Hahns and what, yeah. I just poured through all of it. I must have read 50, 60 books in that year. And it was just debate. And everyone on the ranch were all Protestants, of different heretical sects. And we would just argue. That's like all we did for a year was just argue about the faith. It was a ton of fun. That was my introduction to the reality that there is a difference, that there is any distinction whatsoever. And I became really close with those guys. I love those guys. And sometimes it was like almost fist fights. I think me and my brother almost got in a fist fight one time. And then the Orthodox thing just never really interested me. It's for me, and I know there's people that say I'm going to, simplify it and whatever else. To me, it's just so plainly false. The fact that there's wild division within the Orthodox community, and there's no headship. There's, and then also obviously the reality of the Petrine office being so plainly rooted in history. It was never something I really investigated very in depth.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that's very natural. I think it's very different than mine. For mine, I watched like a debate, and then I was completely convinced by the debate I couldn't stay Protestant, but then I didn't know whether to be Orthodox or Catholic. And so for me, it was a big kind of delving back and forth. And I mean, I have Eastern icons behind me, so obviously, and I'm a Eastern Catholic now, so it's like there's some of that appeal for me. For me, a lot of it ended up just being coincidence. If there was no Eastern church by me, I would have just became Latin Catholic. But I think especially one of the issues is that a lot of the people who aren't immediately drawn in by their aesthetics don't get the appeal of orthodoxy oftentimes. And the people who are really drawn in are oftentimes, initially at least, just drawn in by the aesthetics. And so I think it's kind of if it doesn't do it for you, then it's not going to really excite you oftentimes. And that's because they don't really offer a great option to a Western man.
Right. Yeah, no, and I've been to, I think I've been to 8 Eastern rites, Eastern Rite liturgies over the years. I've got friends that are Maronite and was it Melkite, all the different Byzantine. And so I've been to a bunch of them, and they're just magnificent. They're all really so magnificent. What they all have in common, other than liturgical norms, right? Because obviously those cross all those rites. What I find interesting, and not to be contentious about anything, but what I find interesting is the one thing that they have in common for me is that very, very palpable sense of the numinous, that dreadful, joyful awe, that's always present in those liturgies. And then there's only one liturgy in the church that doesn't have that.
Yep. Yeah, we all know. Yeah. So you said you were reading a lot when you were on that ranch. Were you a big reader before that, or did that kind of force you to really start consuming at that rate?
I was a voracious reader from my youth. When I discovered reading, I used to get in trouble for reading too much because I would just stay up. My mom was stupidly bought me this little like headlamp light, and I would just like rip through batteries, and I would read all night, and I would get in trouble because then I didn't want to get up the next day because I was reading until 5 o'clock in the morning. And it wasn't, most of my early years of reading was like Goosebumps. I don't know, you're probably too young to remember Goosebumps, but it was like a huge thing. So it was like nonsense stuff. And then little by little, by my 11, 12, 13, I started getting into Lord of the Rings. And then I went through this weird phase right around 14. I don't know what it is about 14. Right around 14, I went through this phase where I consciously wanted to be great. I wanted to be a great man. And I knew that to be a great man, you had to know what was great about the men before you, right? There was something in me that just a natural urge, and also probably intellectual pride. It was probably God was probably using that at least to some good degree. And so I went and just on my own started reading all these classics. Some of them were like neoclassics, like Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. A lot of trash mixed in there, but a lot of really great stuff too. And I forced myself to do it. A lot of it I didn't even appetitively enjoy. I just made myself do it, and I'm so grateful for that. And then, the alcoholism and the womanizing really kicked in hard around 15, 16. And I basically stopped reading entirely. By the time I was 18, I don't think I ever really read anymore. And when I picked up the faith, my appetites were so disordered that I couldn't read. I mean, I couldn't sit and read. When people say, there's millennials and zillennials and whatever that have never read a book, I get that, because when your appetites are so used to being fed, when your senses are so used to receiving stimulus, it's practically impossible, not literally impossible, but practically impossible to actually sit down and focus your mind on a book. So I actually had to start with audio books at first. I would sit and listen to audiobooks, and that recollected my senses, my appetites. And within 3 months, I was picking up books, and then I was back to hard books again. And You know, I now have gone full circle though, because now that I'm on the farm, for the last few years, I read very little. You know, I might read 10 books a year. You know, and a lot of it's rereading stuff. I just love rereading stuff now. I've got this huge library, and I find myself just kind of revisiting the stuff that I really love.
That makes sense. Yeah, I think that I personally, I used to read. I remember one time I was camping with my dad, and we were driving from the campsite to, like, I don't know, maybe the visitor center or the showers or wherever it was, and I pulled out a book and started reading, and he said, "You can't go 5 minutes without putting your damn nose in a book." And I remember, I've told him a few times recently. I said, "Man, I bet you regret saying that, don't you?" Instead, now it's battling. Put your phone away, do this, do that. It's like, man, you'd almost wish someone would stick their nose in a book.
You know, it's true. It's true because it's such a higher virtue.
Hmm.
I do think that, and I know this is true for me. I don't know if it's more universal or less universal than I think, but I do think there is a lot of escapism that can take place even in reading. And because our world is so immersed in media entertainment, I think it's easy to overlook that and go, well, at least they're reading, right? I got a kid that reads. That's awesome. And there's certainly more good that comes from, because there's goods that come from anything, even when it's utilized in a disordered way, right? So I definitely think that in that age, even reading can be a form of escapism.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely felt that. Yeah, especially reading, fantasy and adventure books and all that kind of stuff. I've heard people kind of, whether it be in movies or shows or books, where they kind of describe like that really visceral, like, I have to hide away from my life type of escapism. And it was never that, but it was for me
Right.
a lot more, it was more kind of structured, I guess, where like I liked the worlds people built, and then I would watch a video like, how did they build this world, what is the consistency in it, and so it was more of a, it sounds weird to say, but more like scientific in my brain, more
Yeah.
structured, less like I didn't have
It,
a life to escape from.
yeah. No, it's funny you said that. Is I used to, especially when I was reading a lot of fantasy stuff, Lord of the Rings, Once and Forever King, all that sort of stuff. I got into a phase where I would create maps, and I would create these little, I just drew a lot. I love drawing. And I was never good at it, but I just enjoyed it. And
Mhm.
I would just draw these huge worlds, right, and draw these maps and design these characters, right, that inhabited the world. Um, and yeah, so and it was very scientific. My goal, and you could probably relate to this, my goal in that was to make it as fully accessible to the intellect as possible. I wanted everything to work right. I wanted everything, what the science of the world was, how things function, even political factions and stuff. I mean, all of that was so interesting to me. So in a way, that's our root in reality, right? There was at least that, which is why it's so much better than just going down some media rabbit hole, that a Marvel rabbit hole or whatever.
Mhm.
At least we're hanging on to that part of the intellect that wants to be practical and wants to be rooted in reality. And I think that was part of the saving grace of my escapism in those years.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. I definitely think that, like you're saying, even if you're spending too much time doing it, or, neglecting other important things, like there are benefits that are brought about. I think it kind of gives you like an ordered way of thinking, and kind of helps give you kind of structure in your mind and stuff. I definitely agree. So you said that you said in Orange County, were you doing a lot of interacting with the Norbertines, or was that a different group?
Yeah, that's where
Oh,
I
okay.
was baptized. Yeah, the original Abbey. I
Okay.
have never been to the new one, but yeah, their
Yeah.
original Abbey was where I was baptized. They actually built the baptism font for me.
Oh, that's awesome. That's really cool. I didn't know
Yeah,
that. Yeah,
yeah, because
I've
it being an abbey, they don't usually do baptisms because that's canonically irregular. You normally would be baptized in a parish,
Mhm.
and but I was really adamant. I flat out said I'm not going through a year of RCI. There are no Latin Mass parishes or anything, and I'm just not. I'm not going to do it. I don't know anything about it, all that stuff. I don't want to listen to father Hollywood gay guy, wax on about nonsense. I won't do it.
Yeah.
And they were very understanding. They were like, we totally get it. And which is why they said, if you come every day, and it was in traffic, it's like a 3-hour drive for me. So I actually stayed down there a lot of the time. I would stay down there for a week straight sometimes and just pray the office with them and kind of live with them. And they would always find somewhere for me to sleep. And yeah, so I got a crash course, and I'm still friends with all those guys, probably Justin. And yeah, they're awesome. I love them. Yeah, I love those guys.
So you were saying that in the initial conversation / lecture you had heard that the priest was very Thomistic. Have you kind of maintained I don't know if a devotion is the right word, an interest in Thomism specifically, or have you kind of found maybe other saints that kind of capture your heart more? I'm kind of curious how you feel about that.
Yeah, I personally think that Thomism doesn't really exist in the way that people treat it. Realism. So St. Thomas was, philosophically was a realist, right? He was rooted in the realism of Aristotle and maintained the integrity. And now, granted, if you want to talk about the East, there's certainly kind of different branches of thought, to there. But in the Western Church, there was really one philosophical school that maintained continuity throughout the entirety of it. And so, St. Thomas was just the peak, right? St. Thomas was in my opinion, just kind of the perfection of that. So yeah, I mean, that's the school of philosophy that I'm steeped in. I do read a lot of St. Thomas still, although I really prefer his commentaries. I'd sometimes go to the Summa or whatever as a resource if I need to look something up or something like that. But I love his commentaries. I can sit for hours. I'm a father of 5 and a subsistence farmer, so I don't have hours. But I love sitting, opening up a commentary, and then just kind of going back and forth with the scripture and with the commentary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's very interesting. All right. I think for that kind of side of it, that's about all I have to ask. One of the things I'm the most interested about hearing you talk that I actually haven't heard you get the most into is, I guess, your farming and I don't know if you call it a farm or a ranch or what even the technical difference might be, but obviously I didn't find out who you were till about the last year. And so because of that, I'm not super necessarily caught up on your journey with that. So one of the things I'm really curious about is that I would assume that when you finally make the decision, I'm not going to be a Hollywood guy anymore. I'm going to go and make this change. Obviously, it's not like an immediate jump, but I'm really curious. One, what makes you decide, farming? And then how did you learn that? Were you taught things growing up that translated? Has this all been new learning for you? I'm really curious about that.
Yeah. So the process to homesteading, farming, ranching, it's all the same, really. People use different terms for different specificities, but it's all the same. I generally refer to our home as a subsistence farm. Subsistence farming just means that your goal is to farm in as broad a way as possible so that you're providing for as much of your needs as possible. And it's all integrated so that there's no, or as little as possible, exterior inputs, right? So, there's a difference between what I do and like hobby homesteading. A lot of hobby homesteaders have a job, part-time job, full-time job. A lot of them are like tech guys of some sort, and then they're pouring money into the homestead, right? And in most of those cases, it's actually far more expensive. The way they do it, it's far more expensive than just buying like fresh organic food from the store. It becomes very time consuming, very expensive. So I do a very different kind of farming. But what led to it was, so after and it's kind of I'll give you the whole backstory as briefly as possible. So I had my own company out in Hollywood. I was running a film and TV development company, and we had just finished a movie with Selena Gomez that I wrote and produced. And then we had just sold a show to Netflix that I had created and wrote and produced. Netflix brought us on to produce that. They bought it from us, but also hired us to produce it. And there was already talks of Emmy nominations for the show, and I wasn't. I had for a while been really struggling reconciling the faith with my work, and even at that, we were very much a Catholic company. We were, this kind of we saw ourselves as like a Trojan horse. It was a very conscious thing for us to be this kind of underground Catholic company. We're going to baptize the culture. We're going to create secular projects with deep Catholic roots and change the culture and all of that. And I was a big cheerleader for that. All of our investor meetings, that was the big rally cry. Let's change the culture. And at a certain point, I know filmmaking better than anyone most people will ever talk to. I know every aspect of it. My company went on to do a movie with Mel Gibson right after I left. We had meetings with anyone and everyone. I know everything from film financing to production, all of it. And I just realized that what I was saying wasn't true. And I didn't want to believe that. I really didn't want to believe that, because it was my whole life, 30 years of a career. And not only that, but the company that we had just started a few years before, is now about to blow up. We're already making $20 million projects. We're doing great. And so, when you have it, this is why attachments are so important to spot and to fix, root them out, man. That attachment to not wanting that to be true caused me to ignore the truth that grace and intellect were trying to present to me. And as an addict, you can't ignore your conscience for very long. That's that's the death of any soul by a million paper cuts, but especially for an addict. An addict, the easiest way to stay on the straight and narrow is to just live upright and to follow your conscience, to radically follow your conscience, because the peace that comes from that is it's immeasurable. It's hard to explain how much peace there is interiorly when you are radically following your conscience. And so I was just interiorly in a wonky state. I knew something was off. I wanted to leave my company and start a new company and maybe try to do things a little differently, keep myself a little more isolated, do smaller projects that I could control better for the moral good. And I did. I left my company still with the idea that I was going to start another company. And I was still working for Netflix. The show that I was doing was still in production, so I had some scripts to finish up for them. And I had a big relapse, which was, ended up being very public, deserved shame to my family, to me. And that public shame was so good for me, because it was enough to just rattle me to my bones, and I'm going to mass every day. We're praying our rosary. I pray the office every day from day one, And so, like, if you look at that on paper, you go, "What? Something doesn't make sense."
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're not going to mass every day, praying the rosary, and then you just have this big relapse. And so it shocked me to my core, man. It was like, something is wrong. Something is wrong with me that I need to figure out. And so Netflix actually was surprisingly very kind. They said, "Hey, you're our guy. You can come back whenever you want. You can stay away as long as you want. We're not going to sue you for breach of contract. Get yourself figured out." They said, "If you want to come back tomorrow, fine. If you want to take 6 months, take 6 months. Your contract's good." And so I did that. I took about 6 months, and I went and spoke with all the priests that I knew, a few different exorcist friends of mine, and just hung out with my family, thinking, watching my kids play in the backyard. And I thought a lot. I was reading a lot, and I was thinking a lot. And it was almost like this. The best way I can explain it is there had been 10 years, about 10 years or so, of information that was trying to congeal, right? It was trying to form into this big idea, but I wasn't letting it because all those attachments were kind of keeping the parts separated. And in that 6 months, those parts all just came together. My thoughts about the economic, the grave moral conundrum of our economic system, especially as it relates to usury and things like that. The social aspect of fathers having been lied to and told that going and working 9 to 5 for your family is a good and manly thing to do, even though it's contrary to the natural law to leave your family for 8 hours a day. Who's like you have two duties as a father: provide and protect, right? And as let's call ourselves conservative Catholics right now, just for the normies. As a conservative Catholic, we'll all say very, very readily, that's right. Provide, we really rally behind the provide part. And then we completely disregard the protection part. And we'll give lip service to it and say, well, they're safe. I mean, they're in modern society and we have police and they're safe. But the reality is there's part of the natural law that's being disregarded there. In fact, I talked to my wife about this. I said, look, did you notice a difference in your interior state between when I was working 9 to 5, running my company, coming home every night, and I was pretty hands-on as a father, as a husband, and then when I took on this new lifestyle where I'm here, I'm working the fields, you can call out the door to me. She said, yeah. She said, it's really weird because I always had this underlying anxiety that I wasn't aware of, but it was always there, kind of precipitating all my thoughts. She said, and suddenly when you were here all the time, there was this ease to everything. Everything became easier, even though nothing had really changed, practically speaking. And her assessment was that, ultimately there's a constant fear in women that if anything goes wrong, right? If the Mongol hordes show up at the gates, nobody's there for them. And that's just built into their nature. It's just part of their nature. So anyway, so that thought had really been mulling around, what it does for kids, the idea that kids only see their father in his leisure time, right? So they're missing out on seeing what a father is for 8 hours a day of him exercising the virtue of his labor. They're not privy to that. They're only privy to him in his leisure time, which I think is probably one of the biggest sleeping, it's the biggest sort of sleeper problems in our society that no one's even recognized. I think people's relationship to fatherhood, relationship to masculinity is severely damaged by that singular fact. So that thought was mulling around. I had all these thoughts. And then I was thinking a lot about grace and how, what a horror it is to reject even the little ones. And all of that came together and it made me realize that, because I was looking for like other possibilities, right? Maybe I'll go into this career, go into that career. And it just suddenly dawned on me that what I want to do is live some kind of a life of poverty, poverty as it relates to our current social norm, right? Our current social state, where I'm present with my family, where they're integrally connected to our livelihood, to the way we live. I was thinking about historical precedent for that. And that's where the homesteading came from. So a lot of people get into homesteading. That was a long way to get to homesteading, but a lot of people get into homesteading because they want food security, they want healthy food, or they want the virtue of going out and working with their hands. None of that was really a motivating factor for me. It was just, if I'm going to embrace this life of poverty where I'm living some kind of home-oriented state, the only thing I could think of that made sense was was homesteading. It provides our food. It puts us all in a place where we're linked to the reality of our existence, right? We're just intricately linked to it. The kids will see me day in and day out, bringing meat in and putting it on the table, and they'll get to see what that what a man looks like in his duties of providing, and they'll also feel protected because I'll always be there. And so that's where the homesteading came from. I didn't know anything about it. I We donated all of our savings and everything when I committed to the poverty thing, and then I realized that I needed to homestead because we need food. So it was a really bad order of events, and through kind of I won't get into the particulars because I don't think they're helpful to anyone, but through really a miraculous turn of events. I will say it wasn't charity, because I know a lot of people think, oh, people probably just donated them. No, through a very, very strange turn of events, legal, government, whatever. I mean, all of a sudden, we're praying about having this house, and then we end up with this little 3 acres and this little old beat up farmhouse, and it was exactly what we needed at the time. And so I got some cows and I started putting up fences, and I didn't know anything about anything. When the cows got here, it was one of the most terrifying moments of my life. When you're up close to it, a lot of people have never been up close to a cow. I hadn't really been up close to a cow. When you're standing up next to a cow, even when they're behind a fence, it's your fence. You built it. So it better, you don't even know if it's a good fence because you built it. And then you're just going, man, these things are huge. These are monsters. I mean, these are beasts in the true sense of the word. Mm-hmm. And then you got to get out there and you got to figure out how to make them move from one fence to another fence, and you just figure it out, and you make mistakes, and cows get out, and you spend 5 hours chasing them around the neighborhood like a lunatic, and then you figure out how to not let them get out anymore, and you just one step at a time. But I think the biggest thing that I've done that most people don't do, and I think this is what has helped me the most, because poverty was the principle from the beginning with the homesteading. Mm-hmm. I needed to find a methodology of farming that was, ironically, farming used to always be free. Mm-hmm. All you needed was 40 acres and a cow, right? That was the old kind of adage. You just needed land, and then you got your animals and you made it work. Mm-hmm. The reality is we have backwards engineered corporate models of farming into homesteading models, and it's very expensive. It's very stupid, and it's not even healthy for the animals. So I've kind of invented what I lovingly refer to as Thomistic farming. That's what Father Ripperger's called it. You've got this kind of Thomistic farming, and it's really simple. You just look at the natures of the things. You just act like an old-fashioned farmer. You sit around, you twirl your mustache, smoke a pipe, watch the cows walk around, watch the chickens walk around, and you start to learn what they are, right? Quid est chicken, quid est cow. And then you start to figure out what they need in order to really flourish and to thrive. And the land provides it. All of these animals exist in nature, in natural environments, without human intervention. I mean, granted, chickens are, we won't get into chickens, but for the most part, you can make these animals thrive, really thrive, without spending $1 on them. And that's been the greatest joy for me. It's like an endless puzzle, figuring out how to make these animals really thrive. And it's all free, right? You just have to figure out how to make your land work for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. So that's one thing I was really curious to hear, because one thing I've thought of, I spent I think Anthony from Avoiding Babylon told me that you're going to be talking with him and Rob next week, I think. And I was talking with him at the beginning of this week, and I really wanted to talk to him partially because he's a guy who's done his whole career in the trades, and he has a son very close to my age. And so I was really
Yeah.
curious kind of what his outlook on the world is, because the point I'm at right now, I really feel, honestly, I just feel lost. Like I'm about to get married soon. I became Catholic this year, and I just have like no clue what I'm going to do. And so
Yeah.
talking with him, asking him, well, what's your experience working like this? What's your experience? He lives on the opposite side of the country from me, kind of talking about some different stuff. I was really interesting what it was like for you to start, because I was kind of curious, is it a poverty thing, but you bought the land? Did you start from was the poverty first that turned into the homesteading? And that's kind of seems to be what it is, which is a lot more natural of a way to do it.
Yeah. So the homesteading was an answer to the poverty, right? Because as a layman, as a father and a husband, I have to provide food and shelter for my family. Now, I will say this. I think that what people believe they're supposed to provide for their family, I think, is radically disproportionate to reality. I've gotten a lot of flack over the last 4 years, because there's a very boomer mindset that is just we're all kind of stuck in, and I was stuck there too. I had to really think through the principles. Well, they got to have insurance. Well, they got to have this. Well, they got to have that. They got to have these particular luxuries. They have to be able to go to the zoo and do these things. It's just that, so you never bring your family to the ice cream shop, which, by the way, I do. But the point is like there's all these extra things that nobody in history had. And now all of a sudden, because our society has normalized it, you're considered a derelict father for not providing those things. Me and my wife have spent so much time thinking through this stuff. When I say we, I mean I think through it, and then I discuss it with her. Women learn much more readily through questions and answers, right? So the reality is, I genuinely think my kids are more well-rounded and happier and more radically Catholic than almost anyone's kids I know. And I no shade at anyone. I'm not, it's not a competition. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that I think the fruits are really obvious. And my kids have no idea. We don't talk about money. We don't talk about things that we don't have. They get a little bit of it through, various friends and stuff, seeing this and that. But for the most part, this life is just normal to them. They're perfectly happy. They have all their needs met, and they genuinely wouldn't choose a different lifestyle. And I think that's a big thing. As for young men, though, because you're talking about yourself. So like right now, we're stuck in Michigan. We had a big issue about a year ago, and it turned our life upside down in terms of the farm. We had to move and everything. And so I'm here back at our original 3-acre farm, basically renovating the house, the old farmhouse, so that we can get it sold, so that we can pay off our land in Arkansas. We've got 80 acres down there, and I'm going to build us a house down there. But so we're stuck here, and of course, poverty means I don't have any money. So I'm working the trades right now. I've got a guy that owns a general contracting company out here. That's a buddy of mine, a Catholic friend. And he was like, hey, I'm short some guys. He said, if you want to come to work for me, it's kind of neat, because once you just accept the fact that you're just a guy in the world, just kind of, you don't have to know anything. You really don't. You just go out there. If you're really committed to doing your best and just figuring stuff out and taking initiative, right, to like try and because there's a lot of guys that'll just kind of laze their way through stuff. I've seen guys on the job site that are like that, but for the most part, if you're really taking initiative, you just figure stuff out. You can do just about anything. I mean, in one day I'm, ripping off roofs and re-roofing a roof and, doing all kinds of stuff I've never done before. And that's been going on for 3 months. Every day's different because he's a general contractor. So we drywalled a whole house. We ripped the roof off of the house, put another one on. What have we done? We've redone flooring and siding on houses. And I mean, it's always something different. And then he basically takes my weekly wage, and then he buys my materials for this house that I'm renovating. So that's the deal I have with him, and it's been working out It has been longer than I was expecting it to be, but this is just where God has us right now. We're hoping to be home in Arkansas maybe in the next 3-4 weeks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but you totally can do it, and I recommend the trades. I recommend, I'm going to do a video for young men, but I'll spoiler alert. My general advice to all young men is, go find whatever trade job you can, preferably something that's as generally applicable as possible, right? Really specific trades aren't going to be as helpful in the long term, because my advice is not to stay in that and build a career in that. My advice is to live as radically austere as you can in your state in life. If you're already married, it's going to be a lot harder, obviously. If you're a young man that hasn't gotten married yet, man, you have a blank slate. And this is what I tell everybody. Live as austere as you can. Buy yourself 40 acres. I'm telling you, if you go to the middle of nowhere, right, Arkansas, you can buy 40 acres in the Ozark Mountains in Arkansas for $60,000, right? You absolutely, if you're willing to just live for 2 years, let's say you put, a general pause on your social life, on whatever you think the social norms of reality are, and you just live like a hermit for 2 years, you can pay off 40 acres. Now, if that 40 acres has woods, right? It needs to have woods. This is the important part. You get yourself a sawmill. You can literally spend the rest of your life not making any money. You can build your own house. You can build your own everything. It's all free. Make sure you're in a place with low property taxes. That was one of the problems here, was the property taxes. They were killing me. In the poverty thing, $3,000 a year is a lot. All of a sudden property season would come up, and it's like, okay, I need to figure out how to where am I going to come up with $3,000? If you're not maintaining an income, you can't make as much, right? You know how, if you're maintaining an income, you're getting raises, your time is becoming more valuable. If you just pop out once a year and you're like, I need to earn $3,000, you're making $10 an hour. So, down in Arkansas, the 80 acres is $400 a year, property taxes. All right. Like, you can do a side job, you can reside someone's house or whatever, some little side job. And this is why I recommend going to the trades while you're building this little dirt empire for yourself, is because you're going to be stocking up skills, right? You're going to be gaining all these skills. You're going to be figuring out how to use tools. You're going to be getting all sorts of tricks along the way. And then you build a small subsistence farm. Like, you can, 10 families can survive on 40 acres. You can't go below 40 acres though, ironically, because you don't have the material resources on the land to continue to sustain you, right? You're going to need firewood. You're going to need, timber for building things. You're going to need enough grass to keep a real wide rotation, so that you don't have to be worried about your cows running out of food and then going and buying hay for them or whatever. You need at least 40 acres. I don't think below that's possible. But I'm telling you, and this is a big part of what I'm going to talk about in my video, I think that's the path forward. And then you're scot-free. You're scot-free. You have no bills. I mean, it's bizarre to me now. This would have been bizarre to me to think the opposite 5 years ago, but now it's bizarre to me to think about bills at all, right? Because the reality is, you can actually really easily live without any bills. I mean, me and my wife, we have our cell phones. Our cell phone is our only bill. That's it. Gas money. And I keep track of that. I'm like, okay, it costs a quarter of a tank to get to Mass. So if we fill up once a week, we can go to Mass 3 times. That leaves a little extra money to get around, right? If we need to. So, I personally don't know why anyone wouldn't live that way. If they truly could come to believe that that's possible, I don't know why anyone wouldn't live that way. You're beholden to no one. There's the land is yours. You can build it any way you want. You can run your farm any way you want. You can invent. The creativity. And this is what I think, this is why young men, I think, are struggling today, is because we just aren't made for this. We aren't made for this widget world where everything relies on everything else. You know, you're making all this money just to kind of have the means to pay taxes, and then you need to have enough money to pay these things, otherwise you can't make more money. And it's just this endless balloon of widgets. And to be quite frank, there's too many degrees of separation between what we're practically doing and how we're providing for ourselves. And then secondarily, we don't really have any ownership in anything we're doing. And men were not made for that. Men need to go and build a barn. And then they need to every day. This is what a lot of people will never understand unless they do it. Everything you build, every single day, it gratifies you. Every morning when I let those chickens out of the coop, there is at least a small part of my brain, this little dopamine kick, that looks at that coop every morning for 4 years and would go, man, I built it out of that. Right? And then and then that multiplies out as you are building this little miniature meat empire for yourself, right? Just this little farm that provides for your family. When you butcher a cow, and by the way, I butchered a cow with no knowledge or experience on how to butcher a cow. I shot it in the head, I gutted it, and just started cutting it to pieces, right? Like, it's not hard. It's not like you need a degree to figure out how to do this. It's just meat. It's just meat hanging on bones, man. For, a cow fed us, our first cow fed us, we had a smaller family at the time, but it fed us for about 2/3 of a year, maybe 3/4 of a year. Every single meal is like a celebration. Every meal, there's that part of your brain, there's that little dopamine release. As a man, you are aware of the fact that you cut that cow up. That was your cow. You fed that cow. You kept it alive. You cut it to pieces. You held the raw meat in your hand, wrapped it in wax paper, and stuck it in the freezer. That's your cow. That's your meat. And you're looking at your kids just enjoying it, and they're just eating. And I'm telling you, man, the masculine gratification and joy in that lifestyle that is what's missing from all men. All men. There might be a few exceptions, but that's what's missing. And there's no way to claim it in the current normal world. It just doesn't exist. And I know guys will tell you, well, I go and I put food on the table because I earn a living. But that's real. I get it. Your brain doesn't recognize that that's real. You have to tell yourself over and over and over that that's real, because deep down in the animal part of your brain, you don't believe it's real, and you never will. It is real, right? It is, but your brain will never recognize it as such. And I firmly believe that now. And that wasn't even my main motive, but now that is the main motive. Now, you couldn't drag me. I would, I'd rather be hauled off to the gulags than go work a 9 to 5 to put food on my table. I'll defend my cows. I don't care who comes and says this, that, or the other about what I'm supposedly allowed to do on my land or not. I'll never leave that farm. I will never go back to any other way of life, because there is no other way of life, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I don't know whether or not you'll appreciate me saying this, but some of the stuff you were saying, the Unabomber Ted Kaczynski in his manifesto, he talks about how like everything we do now is like a simulacra of real life, right? You go and you do sports because you can't go and attack another village. You go and you work so that you can, instead of farming or growing or ranching. And obviously, I mean, he's overly reductionistic and clearly, you know, atheistic in his conclusions and reasoning and
Right.
everything. But there is, like with all very, very smart people, there's a reality. Something of the real world is reflected there. And I
Yeah.
think that I kind of see a more baptized version of that in what you're saying. And it makes a lot of sense. And that's something I've noticed currently at my job. I work, takes me about a little less than 30 minutes to get to work. And then I'm there for 8 hours plus a 30-minute unpaid break. And then it's 30 minutes back. And then I'm
Yeah.
working at a computer the entire time. So I'm basically sitting down for 9.5 hours a day.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I
the
mean,
check
that
comes
was my
in.
life. Yeah.
Yeah, the check comes in and you know it's like you said, you know it's real, but it's not even like it would be different. There's a line between you, that, and like a trade. You know, a trade is somewhere in between there, you know, working,
Yeah.
you know, do carpentry or something. But I really I understand what you're saying, definitely.
Yeah. And it's, you know, it's because, you know, the thing with trade is you're still relying on an economic system that's completely fake.
Hmm.
You know, you're still reliant on all these inputs that you don't have any control over. You know, yeah, you can build a table, um, but in the reality of the world we live in today, there is no such thing as a village. You know, Bob, you know, down the village road isn't the one buying your table. It's someone on, you know, off the Google machine or something. Um, there's still that multiple degrees of separation. Or if you're in the trades of helping people build houses or whatever, you know, you're working for a corporation usually. Yeah, you can be self-employed, you know, and then there's also the issue of like a lot of what you're doing is still uh, uh, abstract, at least in the sense of like what is its value. Um, you know, I've got buddies that are in the trade, and because the trades have collapsed so much, they're making a lot of money right now. Right? Like you can make a lot of money in the trades right now because they've just collapsed. There's nobody doing them.
Hmm.
Um, and then there's that unhealthy part of the interaction with it, your relationship to it, where it becomes so abstract. Like you can price gouge or you can aim for fair, but what is fair? Like what you still have to make stuff up in your mind in order to fulfill that whole process, right? And I'm not commenting on what is fair or what isn't fair or whether price gouging in a broken market is. I don't have any commentary on any of that whatsoever. Uh,
Hmm.
I'm just saying that that's what's taking place in your mind. All of those equations, right?
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. That's something where I'd gone to business school. I have a degree in business, and for a long time before converting, I was super into like libertarianism, and you know, everything's like, you know, fair is what the market determines, and you know,
Right.
all you're doing is screwing by like offering a lower price. And since converting, a big kind of change in my mindset has been realizing, for example, like paying a wage to someone, you know, fair is what sustains a man, is not necessarily you know, some objective, you know, metric based on a made up equation is what a man, you
Right.
know, needs to be paid. What is a house supposed to cost? Well, it's whatever the house next to it costs. Is that true? You know, and like you said, you can
Right.
come to those conclusions without casting judgment on the people who cooperate with the system, because it's not like, one, it's not like they've thought about it, and two, it's not like they're necessarily able to immediately remove themselves from it.
Right. And that's the thing is I so often get the reaction of, you know, oh, holier, you know, holier than thou, or, you know, all this. And I go, no, I'm just point. It's like the guy that's saying, right? And they go, oh, you just want civil war. I'm just telling you, civil
Mhm,
war's coming, right?
mhm,
I'm just telling you, a you know, if A equals B and B equals C, A equals C. I'm just
mhm,
telling you those facts, and the reality is, all those problems you've described, it's just a reality that the masculine part of our brain can't do that consistently. It just can't. I'm 100% sure of it. Uh, there's very often times that people have defects, and then they try to universalize their solution to those defects, right? And I've thought a lot about that in terms of myself. I've done a lot of introspection, and I just don't think that's the case here. I think it is a universal fact that the nature of man is such that the current social order that we have and all of the equations that we have to make are not conducive to living as firmly in our masculine nature as we can. And there's degrees of that, you know, and I just think that most men are struggling because of that key fact, and they don't know it. They think that there's all these other problems in society, and there are all those other problems in society, but I think it's just the simple fact that their nature's not being fulfilled. I think if you put any man out on the land and say, hey kid, this is yours, this 40 acres is yours, it belongs to you now, do with it what you will, I think he will have his own invented farm. I invent all day. Creativity, by the way, it's a sham. And I know Catholics, traditional Catholics, largely disagree with me on this because we're reacting to modern art and everything else, and the beauty of the Middle Ages and everything else. And so we kind of hold art, I think, in the wrong place. Creativity was not given to us primarily for the arts. Creativity was given to us for practical invention. It's just the same thing that's happening. The distinction and the cogitative associations that are used in order to invent are the exact same things you use when you're creating art, making those right distinctions. I used to think I would never, ever, because I spent 30 years in a creative life, right? You know, getting to invent stories and all of that. And there's a reason that the whole world wants to do that. It is insanely fun. It is insanely gratifying. And I genuinely believe that it would be a sacrifice that I was making for the rest of my life, because nothing would ever fulfill that nature. And now it's a burden when someone says, hey, can you look at this thing for this story, you know, whatever, because I still have people that reach out to me asking for help. It's a burden. It's not even fun anymore because the joy of inventing on a farm, figuring out how to make this fence, you know, this gate work a little bit better, figuring out how to get water to the chickens without having to go and just fill it up with a bucket every day, you know, inventing these water systems, you know, inventing a hydroelectric system so that we have electricity in the house. All of that invention fulfills your creative nature. I think for most people, it would fulfill their creative nature for the rest of their life. They would have no inclination to go do any silly creative things.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I can definitely see that. I've never thought of myself as being particularly creative. When you see someone, like if you've ever watched like the Bob Ross show or something, you know, and he's smearing the paint all weird, and you go, what is this blob? And then 3 seconds later, you know, it's mountains and a vista of trees. My brain doesn't have whatever sees that many steps ahead. I'm really bad at chess because for the same reason. I'm very much like one step at a time, you know, this and then this is how it needs to be. And so I've never thought of myself as being creative. I'm really good at arguing with people. I'm really good at like logic. And never thought of myself as being creative like that. But I see what you're saying, because those practical solutions are kind of a unification of both of those in a very good way.
And that's the thing. You don't think of yourself as creative because society has told you what creativity is. They've narrowed it down to a small segment of creative use and said, this is what creativity is. But the reality is it's such a broader function. You know, and the reality is also this, that we are all very different in how our minds work. You know, I've got different cogitative associations than you, and we're all different. What's cool about that is, while you have to learn from other people when you're first starting out, you got to ask questions, you got to figure things out. Most men want to own the world that they inhabit. They want to be the masters of that thing, whatever it is. And eventually, not all men, some men will just kind of always do whatever they're told to do. But most men will eventually start deviating from the standard lessons they've been taught, and they'll start creating. They'll start finding better ways that work with their own mind, with their own desires, right? Some men won't want to create a water system for their chickens. They'll actually just enjoy the task of filling up the bucket every day and walking it out to the chickens, right? Some men will not want to build a barn. They'll say, you know what, I'd rather build an integrated shelter in each pasture and keep a year-round grazing system. We'll all create completely different farms. And that was the beauty of Christendom, right? Because it's a very Catholic thing, that amazing balance between the universal ideal and the individual. And there's no other religion or philosophical school that holds those two things in such a beautiful, perfect balance, right? It's only the church says, always follow your conscience, but educate your conscience with the universal principles, right? And even if you're wrong, still always follow your conscience. Like and I know the modernists have hijacked that concept, you know, but it's true. I mean, St. Thomas says that if you think you're committing a mortal sin and you choose to do it, and it turns out that it's not even objectively a mortal sin, you're still culpable for a mortal sin, right? Now I know all the scrupulous people that just heard that are calling their priests right now, but only the church gives us that. And so Christendom was this beautiful tapestry of city-states and tiny micro governments, and it was way more anarchistic. And I'm not an anarchist at all, but from the modern standpoint, from this radically bureaucratic, one-way fits all world that we've created for ourselves, from our perspective here, looking back, if we genuinely looked at history, it would look like anarchy. I mean, every farm was its own micro fiefdom. Every farmer farmed completely. This is where we got all of these amazing inventions, because everyone was just doing it differently. And then they would share ideas, and they would share livestock. They would switch genetics, and they would, it was just this beautiful thing. And if we began, and I think it's possible, and I know now I'm getting into the pie in the sky, and it can be annoying when people start talking like this, but if enough young men got together and said, hey, screw the world, let's do it this way, and they all got their 40 acres next to each other, now you've got a little community, right? And if you do that before you get married, it's a lot easier to integrate your life into that. Post-marriage, it's definitely hard. And past a certain age, you just can't do it. I'm at the cutoff point. I'm absolutely at the cutoff point. Our eviction was perfectly timed, because if it was 4 years later, I probably would have hung up the whole idea and just figured out a different thing to do, because I just physically wouldn't be able to start a farm from scratch at 45,
Yeah, that's really interesting. That gives me a lot of, so I talked 2 weeks ago with a gentleman who advocates, he's a historian, and he's advocating for a return very similarly to what you're saying, but from a lot more of like a historical argument and a lot more of a philosophical argument. And he unfortunately lives in Australia, so he's trying to escape there because that's a bit of a hellhole, And then I'm talking with you, and then next week I'm talking, or actually tomorrow, I'm talking with a gentleman who runs an intentional community. So that, like a hyper-specific community they're building out in Arkansas as well, actually. And so, yeah.
I know him.
Arvil.
Catholic guy.
Yeah.
Huh?
His name's Eric.
Yeah. People have been trying to get me in touch with him, and he's been trying to get in touch with me. We've texted back and forth a couple of times. I really want to talk to him. He's actually only like 30 minutes from me.
Oh wow. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, I'll have to mention.
From my land in Arkansas. Yeah, and then once we ended up out here, we were supposed to get in touch, and I was going to go visit his farm. And then once it's more than a farm. He's got a massive setup. And then when we ended up here, I just kind of dropped the ball on it because like, well, try again when I get back. But yeah, I gotta get in touch with him. I've heard he's done some cool stuff. He's part of a Catholic sustenance farm, kind of semi-survivalist national group. I forget what they call themselves. I know a bunch of them. There's one out here in Michigan as well.
I think we might be
and then
thinking of two different people.
Was of what?
It's possible we might be thinking about two different people.
Oh, really?
Yeah, when you're
Could
describing
be,
it,
yeah.
this gentleman's not Catholic.
Oh, he's not Catholic. Oh, he's not. This isn't the guy then. No, this guy's like very, very Catholic. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, there is a guy in Arkansas that has an intentional community, semi-survivalist, which I'm not. I'm kind of roped into the survivalist category, but I that was never part of my motivation, and it still isn't. I never ever make decisions based on supply lines shutting down next month or whatever. I just don't really care. But yeah, this guy that I'm thinking of, he's got one of those kind of compounds, and he's got one of those intentional communities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I think it's a good thing. It's almost like the free market of social ideas, all kind of working themselves out. A lot of those intentional communities fall apart really fast because they can't help but trend towards socialist principles for some reason. That just almost always ends up happening, and then things fall apart pretty quickly, because then it always becomes, instead of radical charity, right? Like, what's mine is mine and what's yours is yours. And I don't need, 90% of what's mine. So here, you can have it. Instead of that radical charity for your neighbor, it ends up being, what's yours is mine and what's mine is mine. And then everyone falls into that, and then it's this land grab or meat grab, and things just always seem to fall apart in those communities.
Yeah, I think what my friend Michael Whitcraft would say, who you know, is he would say, it has to be natural. Society has to develop naturally. People will naturally be around people like them. People will naturally, Catholics will naturally be around Catholics, so on and so forth. But, if you go and segregate white Catholic neighborhood, black Protestant neighborhood, white Protestant neighborhood, like if you forcing it like that is often where a lot of the conflict and, it's going to collapse like that. I definitely think that there are possibilities, but I think one of the reasons I've been so excited to talk to everyone is just, I'm synthesizing something in my mind. I don't know what it is yet, both in general, as far as ideas to put out there for other people, and as well as how I'm going to move forward with my own life. And, I've been talking a lot with my fiance. We're getting married very soon. And I told her yesterday when I was driving home from work, I said, I was thinking about it. A Toyota Land Cruiser drove by, and that is just like my dream car, that 1980s truck. And I'm just looking at it, and I said, I think that if I could die and I could leave my children enough land that they could stay together, if I could drive that truck until I died, and if I could visit a few places I've never been before, a few specific places on my list, if I did all three of those before I died, I think I could die and be happy, And obviously, I mean, there's other things, kids staying Catholic and all that. And so my goal really has been, what am I going to do to get to that position? I mean, it doesn't literally have to be that truck, of course, but you kind of get what I'm laying.
When we left LA, one of the last vestiges of my previous life was that we were still driving around in a $60,000 Subaru high-tech computer, everything, and that was one of the last things we got rid of. And it was just, in my version of life that I've created for myself and for my family, having a vehicle that I can work on, right? Because to do this, you have to commit to the idea that you're going to be a generalist. You just need to learn stuff. We got the Google machine and the YouTube. You just, you change your alternator. It's not that hard. I had no skills, none. And I've done quite a bit of mechanic work on my car at this point. You just figure it out. right? But getting a car that's pretty easy to get parts for, that you can actually work on, because you can't work on a modern car. I
Yeah.
mean, realistically, you just can't. They're designed so that you can't work on them. So I've got an old 2000, which was right before they put the computers and stuff in. I've got an old 2000 E350, Ford E350. It's a beast of a car. It's awesome. It's the extra big one. So I mean, we put a giant mattress in it when we're road tripping, and the kids crawl around like wild animals. It's great. But that idea of just radically simple, radically accessible, radically accessible life. You mentioned, leaving your kids in a flange where they can stay together. Deep down, that's what everyone wants. And by everyone, I mean, that's what the kids want. The reason that we have this problem of lost wealth from generation to generation is because, I mean, the reality is that boomer generation and the people kind of before them, they were acquiring things that actually had no value, right? These suburban homes, they're stick frame, which means in 100 years, they can't be renovated. They have to be bulldozed. They're junk. Stick framing is a travesty. And then at the end of the day, the kids look at it and go, well, what am I supposed to do with this? And so all they can do is sell it off. And then the taxman gets cut, and, the wealth continues to decline. One of the most joyful moments of my entire life, my second daughter, so she just turned 6, but when she said this to me, she was 5, early 5. She said, Daddy, I know Josephina's her bigger sister. She said, I know Josephina's starting her own convent, and she's going to start her own order. And I know I said I wanted to be a nun with her, but I really think I want to get married. I think I want to be a mommy. I said, that's amazing. That's wonderful. I'm so happy that you know that. And she said, yeah. She said, but will you help me find a husband that wants to live just how we live? Because I have to live with him. And I said, yeah, that's how it works. You live with your husband. I said, what do you mean? She said, well, I don't want to have a different kind of life. I want to just live this kind of a life. And I said, oh, and she said, what if he wants to build a house here? Would you let him build a house here and on our land, and so we can just keep farming here? And I said, yeah. I said, look, I'm going to help you find, first of all, it's my job to help you find a husband that's good for you, a husband that is well suited to you. I said, and I'm going to help you find a guy that wants to live this kind of life. They're out there, and I said, and if he wants to build a house, I'll either teach him how, or he'll already know how, and I'll give y'all farming here, and then you and your siblings can all farm together and help each other, and be up on little Golgotha, which is what we call the little mountain in Arkansas. She'll be up there in her little cell, living her hermitage. So it'll be great. It was just so neat, though. That was her innocent way of expressing that she loves her lifestyle so much that even the proposition of marriage, she wanted to be able to be assured that she could maintain her lifestyle.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's really, I think that in kind of building on what I had said, it feels very natural too. It's not like that. It doesn't have to be forced at all. It is so in line with the healthy inclinations. It kind of feeds like a lot of your virtue, and so because of that, it kind of comes out so naturally like that. And that's something I've noticed, is that where I'm at, you're living in the suburbs, and you go, that jump is so difficult. You're living in such a specific way. And I do think it's a blessing, the fact that, well, one of my biggest blessings is that I have no debt. And so that frees me a lot. But as far as connections, unhealthy connections, or not to people necessarily, but just in the way you live your life, there's a bigger jump. And I mean, I have it easier not having a lot of money, not necessarily having a specific career, to be able to make that jump that someone else might have a lot more difficulty, depending on, whatever the specific solution is.
Yeah. Well, it was exceptionally hard for my wife. She never ever doubted, she went right along. When I told her the goal is poverty, the new plan is poverty, and I don't have it all figured out yet, she just said, okay. All right.
Mhm.
But the practical application of that has been exceptionally difficult, right? Because you got to remember, I came from a lifestyle. We were living in a $6,000 a month house in California. Living a pretty fast-paced lifestyle. We could travel anywhere we wanted. We went to France, traveled all over France for our honeymoon. I lived a very different kind of life. I think a lot of times, when I tell people, I quit Hollywood and, came to do this, I don't think they fully grasp the magnitude of it, right?
Mhm.
It's a strange thing now in hindsight, looking back. We've gone 9 months with $1 in our bank account, and just tried to figure out how we're going to get to Mass, right? I used to
Mhm.
live a lifestyle where my wife could wake up and be like, let's go. She could say anywhere. Let's go to Hawaii. I'm like, all right, let's go to Hawaii. I mean,
Mhm.
and we perceive that as freedom, right?
Yeah.
It's license. It would be the proper word for it. But it is so addicting in our appetites that going
Mhm.
from that to this is a lot harder. Which is
Yeah.
why, if young men, if we can get them to break that cycle, if we can convince them not to listen to the Tates and all these new money men, right? That's like the big craze right now that's combating the hyper feminist world we live in, is that like money man movement. And it's they're not going to be any better off. They're going to be much worse off. Because once that addiction's there, it's hard to go back. Once that lifestyle is rooted, especially if you get married in that. I married a gem of a woman, but 99% of the time, uh, married in that lifestyle, the odds of you being able to exit it are slim to none.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I guess maybe if I could ask you a few practical questions that you might have advice on, and then, well, not, I guess I've heard you say you don't do advice, but maybe more practical tips maybe might be a better way to say it. Because you had said,
Yeah,
for example, like the 40 acres, you had said woods. So one thing is like kind of when you're deciding I don't know how much of it you're going to talk about in the video you're making, but when you're like looking at places to settle, for example,
yeah,
she and I both have like connections and a lot of positive feelings towards something like Wyoming, for example. Wyoming is a lot of open plains and grasses, so that's not
yeah.
necessarily woods and stuff like that. So I'm curious, when you're looking at
Right.
places, what are kind of your thoughts on that? What are some priorities you might kind of list, and now that you have experience?
All right. So I would say, the first thing for us, it used to be the mass. The problem is, I'm telling more and more. I'm telling people, don't move for the mass, because we don't know what's going to be where when. Right at this point, you're just going to have to do your own thing. We're building our own chapel. We're going to get a priest. Come hell or high water, we're going to find a priest, and we won't be without the mass. We'll make
Mhm.
that happen. And so I think we're in a state where that consideration shouldn't be preeminent. The second consideration is something that resembles community. I strongly recommend family. I've lived in two different types of circumstances where we've had really, really tight communities, but no family, and less tight communities, but family. And neither of our families, neither my wife's nor mine, um, are Catholic. They don't share our beliefs. But for most people, and there are obviously exceptions, especially in the modern world with the boomer mindset and everything else. I totally get that. Everyone has to apply their own prudential judgment to this principle, but family will always um, be far more helpful than even close communities, because at the end of the day, it's a matter of charity, and I mean charity in terms of like the proper order of charity, right? A lot of people are struggling. Most people, especially nowadays, having lots of kids and not really having a proper infrastructure for that, people are struggling. They don't have a lot of extra bandwidth to just be like, oh, you're about to have a meltdown, Bug's wife. Well, I'm going to come and clean your house for you and take the kids. You just relax. Now, that used to be pretty normal. In the old days, you had such a huge extended family that taxation, that willpower taxation for women especially, was always a safety net, right? There's no safety net for new mothers and wives, and for women and men who haven't gotten into that life yet, where they've got lots of kids and stuff. It's hard to express how easy it is for women to fall apart. It's very hard. It's very hard in our current social order. And there's two ways to solve it, right? Is money, right? So like all of our friends that family and stuff, ton of money on babysitters and things like that so that mom gets a break. And now that's not always bad, right? You can get the local girl from the trad parish and say, hey, 15-year-old so-and-so, here's a little pocket money for you. Can you watch the kids tonight? Mom needs a break. I think that's not bad, but it is a solution that requires money. If you're living near family, maybe it's just my family. I don't know. I think this is pretty universal though, is that that you can rely on them in a way that's a little more expected versus pure charity, right? So that's one consideration. And again, everyone has to apply their own prudential judgment to that, because that's not going to be true for everybody, especially nowadays. The third thing I look at is taxes, right? Because property taxes can vary wildly. The 60 acres that we were on out here in Michigan was like $7,000 a year. Our 3 acres is $3,000 a year. My friend that's joining us on our farm down there, he's buying 10 of the acres of our 80. They lived a very high-end lifestyle in New Jersey. His property taxes were $40,000 a year.
Makes me want to cry.
I was like, you were working to pay your property tax. You were renting your, and they lived on like 2 acres with like an old Victorian house, right? That's bizarre. I mean, that's like crazy. So, do a little research on figuring out what are the property taxes going to be here. Look at regulations generally. You don't have to go down a rabbit hole on it, but is it a place that's generally kind of easy going on letting people like live their own life on their own land without being, too overbearing? Because here in Michigan, it's not like that. Here in Michigan, they're breathing down your neck. Oh, I had the regulatory guy at my house all the time. They fined me 6 or 7 times. I never paid it. And they never took me to jail. So I guess it's all good. But I mean, they were here constantly, right? Like, you're not allowed to grow your grass. Like, my cows eat this grass. What are you talking about? Like, I can't mow it's my cow's food, and I'm zoned agriculture. So, like Arkansas is the Wild West. There are literally no rules, not even with building a house. You can build a house out of junk from the junkyard and live in it. And there's no rules against anything in terms of construction, nothing. It's the Wild West. So you want to look for stuff like that, right? Like when you're looking, pay a little attention to that. Again, you don't have to go down a rabbit hole and look for every regulation, but make sure it's a place that's not going to nag you to death. If we don't have to die in a shootout, over some cows, that would be awesome. You know what I mean? And for me, I'm a non-consequentialist. I'm a radical non-consequentialist, which means that will be my end eventually if I'm in a place with lots of regulations, because my answer has to keep being no. It has to keep being, this is my natural way of life, and the only solution is for you to come with lots of men in armor and drag me out of here, in a body bag. I've said that to them, and I've meant it every time I said it. So yourself in that situation. And then the third thing is resources on the land. This is a huge one that no one really thinks about anymore because we don't live that lifestyle. Right? We grow up in a lifestyle where the land is your resources. It wasn't until about a year into living on the 60-acre farm. So we were on the 3-acre farm, and it could have never been self-sufficient. I would have always had to go outside of my land to buy things in order to keep the farm running. And I didn't quite realize that because all the YouTubers say otherwise, but they're all just hobby farmers. Now the 60-acre land, all of a sudden, when there was a need, I could walk around my land and figure out how to solve my needs by looking at my land. I could go, well, I need some fencing. Okay, I'll chop down 10 trees and I'll cut fence posts out of them. Right? We need to heat our house. We need X amount of firewood per year. Okay, if we only have 20 trees on the land, we're going to be out of firewood in 2 years, right? Whereas, with our acreage, it's all woods in Arkansas. I mean, we can run firewood 6 months out of the year and never run out of firewood for the rest of our lives, and 5 generations on, right? Like it'll always replenish itself faster than we can use it because there's so much land there. Water, if you don't have water, you don't have water, right? There's no way to live without water. So you need to make sure that you've got access to water when you're looking at this land, whether it's flowing water. You want to know what the headwater is on it. So like our creek, our property is the headwater for our creek, which is crazy. This creek is like 20 miles long, but because of the way the mountains are around my house, around my property, it's all springs, natural springs. And those natural springs create that huge flowing creek and all the runoff when it rains. So that creek, we're the headwater. So no one can take my water from me, right? I'm going to have water forever. Nobody can dam it up. Nobody can divert it somewhere else. So you want to make sure you've got good access to water. You kind of just have to think like a pioneer, right? Like, and the reality is a lifestyle that's closely tied to your own resources is just way more peaceful, because if every time you need something, if you can go for a walk and figure out how to solve your needs by your land, and that's why I say have a lot of trees, because wood is, I mean, you can use it for everything. You can build your house with it. You can build fences with it. You can build your tree houses. I mean, wood is an amazing resource. If you're in Wyoming though, and you don't have woods on your land, you'll just have to solve your resource problem another way. You'll have to, I'm going to build a 2,000 square foot house. I've done the math. I'm going to build that house for about, not counting my sawmill and my tractor that I'm going to need to build it. Other than those two things, just material wise, I'm going to build that house for about $7,000. And it's going to be a magnificent home. I mean, it's going to be insanely beautiful. The architecture, I'm a big architecture guy, so I've spent a lot of time designing it. I've spent, about 9 months engineering and designing this house. It's going to be magnificent, and it's going to cost me like $7,000. If you're going to build a house in Wyoming and you don't have any trees, right? Digging around, try to find some stone, and you use those resources. If you don't, then you got to go buy the resources. And resources, as you know, in this economy, they're insanely expensive. Just the material for the house is going to cost you $60,000.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm a big fan of like knowing what resources you have. Don't buy an old degraded piece of farmland that's just flat, because there's nothing there. There's no rocks. There's no trees. There's no nothing. There's no resources. It's a big piece of land that gives you nothing, right? And that's I didn't even know to think like that until quite a few years into living the lifestyle I've been living. All of a sudden, everything looked like a resource to me. Everything was something that could be used in some way. And then stewardship kicks in, and you're like, man, I got to take care of all this stuff so that it can keep providing for me and my children and my children's children.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's a good list. I think I would imagine that you could probably list all those things off, and it would probably bring you down to maybe a dozen places to really, really look
Yeah.
diligently, at, I would imagine. Yeah, that's really interesting. That gives me a lot to think about. Um, yeah, I don't know. You kind of excited a thought in my brain. Like I said, I'm trying to synthesize something and I don't know what it is and I don't know what my conclusion is yet. I was kind of speaking out loud with my
I,
fiance and she
I'll
goes, "Yeah, I can tell you're really putting something together, but it's just not there yet."
I'll tell you a hack to the system that I figured out. I ended up not doing it because we found a piece of land that we really loved, and it was dirt cheap, and it had all my resources, and I mean, it's a gem.
Mhm.
Um, but when we were initially looking, I had, and now this is not advice because I'm not telling anyone to do this. I'm just saying it's something that could possibly be done. There is a lot of land that's bordered to state land and federal land, um, and it's generally pretty remote. So maybe it's a little bit less land with a lot less resources, but you've got 500,000 acres next door to you that's got all kinds of resources. So I'm just saying that when I was looking at land, I was looking at a lot of that as
Mhm.
well, and kind of going, well, I could little by little come into resources some way, which which I won't express explicitly, but so
Yeah.
that is one thought. No, I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, that is something I've thought about. I mean, as far as there are, places with, or there are, I mean, through hunting, I know that in a lot of areas, I think in our local forest, there's certain ways you can harvest trees with permission. I mean, trying to constantly deal with that year after year is where it becomes more problematic,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
get some jerk or some crotchety lady in an office who doesn't like you, and all of a sudden,
Yeah, I was thinking more in terms of the initial heavy resource hit of building a house, because
yeah.
I strongly advise every young man to build his own house. I don't
Mhm.
care if you don't think you know how to do it or you don't think you can. Literally everybody can. My brother just built his own house. He's in the middle of building it right now in Arkansas because he moved out there also. My parents and my brother both decided to move up there from Texas, so we can all be together. And I mean, he built his lightning fast. He also had the resources in terms of money, so he just bought lumber and he poured his own foundation with concrete and built. But I mean, look, there's all different ways to do it. And maybe let's say you don't have the resources on your land. You decide, okay, I'm going to get some wide open plains, some grasslands in Wyoming. Maybe you work an extra year and save up the money that it's going to cost to buy the materials for the house, right? And
Mhm.
that's how you solve that problem. Oh, as I was saying, grasslands in Wyoming, there's one more thing I want to mention. You want to look at the fertility of the land in terms of both the soil and the climate. So there's a lot of places in Wyoming. I spent a lot of time in Wyoming. I was just at Father Ripperger's cabin out there. He lives, out in that region of the world. Um, and there's a lot of places in those regions where if you're only feeding your animals the grass that grows on your land, uh, the stocking rate is very, very, very low because
Mhm.
you're
Yeah.
only getting one growth cycle per year, sometimes not even a full growth cycle per year. So there's a lot of places where, I mean, I know Wyoming, they've got areas in Wyoming that look like grasslands. When you look at it, you're like, oh, this is a grassy field. And the
Mhm.
stocking rate is like one head of cattle per 100 acres or something, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Um, so you want to make sure that you know what's going on there. If your goal is to have animals and feed yourself with your animals, and you don't want to have to go pay the hay man every year, then you want to make sure you're going to be able to grow grass.
Yeah, I had listened to a gentleman who had done ranching, and he was talking about how the kind of thing people think is Wyoming, Montana, the plains. He was saying that's actually one of the least affordable places if you ever wanted to ranch on your own to do it. I think he was saying, want to say he lived in Missouri or something, and he was saying that on less than a tenth of the amount of acres, he had more cows than he could in. I think he was using Montana, but they're very similar, obviously, and
Yep.
and so he was saying, yeah, I could get 10 cows on 5 times the amount of land, and now I have 50 cows on, whatever it is. And so whatever the rates are, yeah, that's something I've definitely
Yeah.
thought a lot about. That
Yeah.
is a
Stock rates vary dramatically. So like on my 3 acres here, I actually ran 4 cows on this 3 acres with a really tight twice a day grazing system. And I could get through from the beginning of spring all the way to winter without any feed at all. And it was by the skin of my teeth, but I was able to do it. Now on this 3 acres, I had to buy hay for the winter because I obviously didn't have any excess land to scythe hay, right?
Mhm.
But that's like, I was talking to another guy that lives in Wyoming and runs cattle out there, and he was like, "There's no way, there's no way." He's from New York, by the way, but he lives in Wyoming. So there's no way you do that. You can't run 4 cows on 3 acres. Nobody can do it. I was like, dude, I did it. They're all alive, and I did it. And so don't tell me you can't do it. It really depends on where you are and what your soil's like and what the fertility of the land is as it relates to the climate. That's a
Mhm.
big one, man. It's a real big one because you don't want to get, and this is what I'm going to tell young guys when I do my video. It's fine to sell stuff. Like I'm not anti money. I'm not anti anything in that regard. But you don't want farming for profit to be your main motive, because then you're still going to end up stuck in a cycle, right? It's one thing to say, I want to just produce as much as I can in a healthy way on my land so that I have an excess amount of food for my family. And then whatever's excess, let's say you produce 10 times what your family needs. Great. You have an excess. You can figure out what to do with that, right? You can pass it around your community and create a cool bartering system. You can sell it off. You can put a little shack up by the road and say, freezer meat for sale, and you can offload it any which way you want. I strongly advise that you do not set out to be a farmer for profit, because
Mhm.
all of your considerations begin to change. The way you farm, everything has to start becoming about that bottom line, and you will change the way you farm, and you will put yourself, yeah, you'll be on the land, and yeah, you'll have cows, and it'll be nice, but you'll put yourself back in that same box that you were in, that you were
Mhm.
trying to escape from. That box that your brain's not quite designed to function in.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Um, I think that those were the 2 things I really wanted to or the 2 main topics that I really wanted to hit on. I was listening to the conversation you had had with Chris, and it had been a lot more about kind of the family and faith side. And so I wanted to touch on any of the small questions I had with that. Oh, I guess one last one I'd like to ask. So you mentioned
Yeah.
that it was difficult for your wife to make that adjustment. I'm curious, or kind of from the life you had before to where you were. I'm curious, what were the things maybe you did to kind of help her with that? Because I think that anyone who either is kind of in a stage where I'm not yet married, or someone who's maybe talking to a lady or is already married, like, it's a big consideration. Obviously, like you were saying, the best case scenario to start that would be to be
Right.
single. But I'm curious, do you
Right.
have any tips you could kind of offer as far as how you made that work better, I guess?
Yeah. So there's a few principles that I have very consciously applied in my marriage, and especially in this last 4 or 5 year phase. Principle one is, and I think this is the most. This is applied now, but it applied previously too. I never ever accommodated my wife, not one time, in her disorders. Right? I would certainly comfort and certainly understand,
Mhm.
but I'm not going to. I'm not going to upend anything or make or change any application of principle based on appetitive fits or anything like that, right? Like the second you do that, you're done forever, because and this is nothing against women. I have a house full of women, right? I have 4 daughters. I have a wife. They're my world. But women are way more radically different than men than even most conservatives are willing to admit. I've come to the conclusion that they actually I've come to the conclusion that they actually don't think, they just feel, right? Like basically all their thoughts are come from the feeling first, from the appetite first, from the emotion first. And when you recognize that and you just kind of go, okay, I'm willing to just let you be mad at me, because I know that in your right state of mind, when your emotions are feeling something else, you're happy about this. I think that's the greatest suffering in any rightly ordered marriage for a man, is to be willing to just suffer his wife's hatred of him, because that's going to come. And most of the time when I see really disordered marriages, in people around me, it's because the husband has gotten into a routine of making big decisions, or disregarding principles that he believes in order to chase his wife's emotional state, right? So that was the first one. The first one was, okay, you accept this, you to a certain degree, you kind of understand it, you see that you want it, you know that it will require suffering. When the suffering comes, I'm not going to bend over backwards. Now, let me give you the other side of the equation, because the other side of the equation is important too. I love my wife. I want to ease her suffering, right? So when I can, when it is not contra the principle, I look for every possible way to ease her suffering. So if we have a little extra money and she's been stressed, I think maybe 2 times a year I've done this. I'll say, just go to the movies, which is like crazy because we don't watch movies. We have no TV. We have no internet. We don't have any media in our house at all. So like, to the normal person at home, they're like, what? But for my family in our radical lifestyle, that's crazy, and it's huge. It's huge for her to be like, I'm going out into the world. I've got money in my pocket. I can get myself dinner. I can just have like a single ladies night. It's like, it changes her perspective for like 6 months, right? She's a different person. And that's just one thing, but as much of that as you can do. A big one for her was like, she was always, she liked clothes, and, she can't buy clothes, right? It's just the lifestyle we live. She has the clothes she has, and, she gets 1 or 2 dresses a year, maybe. And that's just it, right? But recognizing that those are joys, and finding ways to try and do that as often as I can, trying to fulfill the things that I can fulfill, even though I know they're not necessary things. They still perk her up and motivate her to continue in the lifestyle. And then ultimately the biggest thing is patience, because as time has gone by, her appetite to rail against when she's suffering the losses, right? When she's suffering, those appetites are just railing against it. But the fruits overcome that. So as time has gone by, she's created stronger and stronger associations in regards to the lifestyle with it. So she can kind of work her way out of it now and go, well, there's no way around this suffering unless I want a different lifestyle, and I don't, right? And so she's at a certain point, she starts to be able to make those calculations on her own. I would never want anything different from my children. I would never want anything different from me. And I remind her, I say, well, look, the only solution to that is that I have a 9 to 5 job. That's it. The solution to, you want a brand new conditioner, shampoo and conditioner, whatever the fancy stuff is. The solution to that, I know it sounds simple, it's small, and maybe even petty, but realistically, the solution to that is I have a 9 to 5 job. Then you can have all the shampoo and conditioner you want. I'm gone 8 hours a day. You're here by yourself with the kids, and you live how 99% of trad women live, versus this 1% application, where you have me here. You can yell out the door. The kids can all hang out with me all day while I'm working, and you can sit and have the sunshine on your face, whatever. Like it's just two different options. And when you remind her of that, she goes, okay, I get what you're saying. Yeah, you're right. So trying to walk her through that. And then the last thing is you can't be a hypocrite. I think there's a lot of times everyone is inclined towards hypocrisy when their attachments or their appetites are going strong. I can't say we're living a life of poverty and you can't have the new shampoo and you can't have this, and then also be going and buying toys for myself, right? Like, I remember I bought a Zippo insert. I had this Zippo that I had for like 20 years, and the insert was broken. And so I was just using Bic lighters because I smoked. I still smoke. But I really liked my old Zippo. I missed having my Zippo. And like a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, I bought this Zippo insert for $20. And it was a big deal. My wife even recognized. She was like, "You bought something for yourself?" Like, yeah, I know it's going to dramatically lift me up to be able to hear that clink of my Zippo. I miss having my Zippo. I'm doing it. I'm buying something for myself. It's a $20 Zippo insert. I have to far more radically live those principles than what I'm enforcing on her. Mm-hmm. As soon as you topsy-turvy it, as soon as and it's the same with kids, right? Whatever you're demanding of your kids, if it's more than what you demand of yourself, they will know. They'll know, and they will resent you for it. And wives are the same. Wives are basically kids. I mean, I hate to say it, but in a lot of ways, wives are very much like my wife always jokes. So she's like, "Did you know you were going to get a full-grown daughter?" And you're like, "Yeah, kind of." You can't be a hypocrite. You got to live out those principles so much more radically than what you're demanding of them. And I think that's probably the biggest one. She's able to look at me and go, okay, he's literally not bought a single thing for himself, outside of his tobacco, which, that's not going anywhere. We'll eventually grow our own, but we haven't done it yet. Outside of that, I haven't bought myself a single thing. Mm-hmm. So when I tell her you can only have 2 new all my clothes have been $1 from our church rummage sale. Literally, mm-hmm. All my pants are $1, all my shirts are $1, all my shoes are $2. And I only buy 4 sets of clothes at the rummage sale every year. I literally spend about $15 a year on clothes. Mm-hmm. So when I tell her, okay, you can have 2 brand new $50 or $60 dresses a year, she knows deep down that I'm more radically applying the principle, and it allows her to suffer that without resentment, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's very helpful. Thank you. Is there anything that you want to kind of leave people with? Do you feel like that's good? I think that my amount of things that I can sit here and pull from your mind could probably go forever, but I think that that's a good
yeah. I think we've covered it all, man. This has been nice. Awesome. It's been real good.
Well, thank you for talking with me. Everyone, this has been ANewCrusade with Bug Hall.